He would talk, but he'd sound just like, if you spoke, he'd sound like you. You know, he's like one of the, you know, a parrot, you know, but he'd try and answer your question, you know.
And we're only aware of matter with positive mass, so we call this exotic matter.
It started with a man stepping out of a silent craft, calm, clean-cut, and asking to see the president. No weapons, no warning, just 5 haunting words. I need to speak with him. What followed would slip beneath the radar for decades, hidden behind locked doors and erased from official history. But now, files once sealed and stories once mocked are beginning to align, and they point to something unsettling. What if we had the chance to change everything? What if the most powerful governments didn't ignore the truth, but feared it? What was buried may have never been fiction at all. But the real question is, why was it silenced? A silent arrival. On a quiet March morning in 1957, the town of Alexandria, Virginia, became the epicenter of one of the most unusual incidents in modern UFO lore. Unlike the dramatic depictions often seen in Hollywood, there were no roaring engines, no streaks of light, and no explosions. According to multiple testimonies and later declassified sources, a gleaming disc-shaped craft descended silently into a field just outside the city limits. The air remained still, and there was no sonic boom, no vibration, and no heat signature. Eyewitnesses reported the scene as eerily calm, with one federal agent describing it as like time paused for a moment. 2 local police officers were among the first to approach the landed object. As they cautiously moved closer, a hatch opened and a man stepped out. Though he was not quite a man in the conventional sense, he was tall, strikingly symmetrical in appearance, wearing a fitted suit that shimmered faintly in the morning light. Without hostility or fear, he looked at the officers and said calmly, "I need to speak with the president." This individual introduced himself as Valiant Thor, and his arrival marked the beginning of a decades-long mystery that would shake the foundations of secrecy within the U.S. government. Even more astounding was the payoff of the encounter with the government, for instead of getting arrested or expelled, Valiant Thor got ushered beneath heavy guard into Washington, D.C. In a matter of a few hours, he was in the Pentagon, and shortly after, he met President Dwight D. Eisenhower and Vice President Richard Nixon. According to Dr. Frank E. Stranges, a minister and UFO researcher who later recorded Thor's visit, he wasn't treated like a threat. It was as if they already knew he was coming. The speed and secrecy with which he was moved through secure government channels suggest prior anticipation, possibly from previous unpublicized contacts. Spite of the lack of public photographs or official documentation at the time, the event has been present over the years. Later, what emerged from classified military files and whistleblower testimonies began to support the incredible story. Allegedly, Project Sigma, a secret initiative under the Pentagon, confirmed Thor's extraterrestrial origin and his peaceful intentions. He claimed to come from Venus to give mankind advice during what seemed to be an increasingly dangerous nuclear age. Although putting him at the arrival point may have been silent and unthreatening, the meanings it carried were anything but. As one CIA operative recalled years later, "We didn't know what he was, but we knew he wasn't lying. Stranger than the landing itself was where he was taken, and who he met." Inside the Pentagon, once Valiant Thor was escorted from the landing site near Alexandria, Virginia, the real mystery began. Unlike typical protocols for handling unidentified individuals, especially during the height of Cold War paranoia, Thor was not detained, interrogated, or confined. Instead, he was taken directly to the Pentagon, one of the most secure buildings in the world. According to eyewitness accounts and corroborated by later whistleblower testimony, Thor was not treated as a threat, but as a guest. In fact, he was granted access to restricted areas normally off-limits even to most U.S. officials. He didn't go through security like everyone else. It was like they were expecting him, said one anonymous Pentagon aide decades after the event. Within hours of arriving, Valiant Thor reportedly met with President Dwight D. Eisenhower and Vice President Richard Nixon, an unprecedented move for an unverified outsider. The meetings, which were held behind closed doors, were never officially documented in public records. However, Dr. Frank E. Stranges, who claimed to have spoken directly with Thor and later wrote Stranger at the Pentagon, stated that Thor had clearance no one could explain. He was allowed into rooms that even top brass couldn't enter without prior authorization. These meetings were said to cover a range of issues, including nuclear disarmament, spiritual enlightenment, and technological advancement. Thor was perhaps able to gain this kind of access not by force or manipulation, but by pure presence, calm, intelligent, totally unspoken authority. It was said that even generals with the hardest of hearts would listen. According to them, with him, their minds reacted strangely with extraordinary clarity. Some had felt they could not lie and could not remain skeptical. "He spoke without speaking," remarked one military officer, referring also to Thor's supposed telepathy. His uncanny effect on those around him contributed forcefully to his fast track in reaching the highest levels of U.S. leadership. Yet even stronger support for Thor's residence in the Pentagon comes from the declassified files of Project Sigma, which detailed various efforts to achieve diplomatic relations with extraterrestrial life. One of the documents contained a description of an entity matching Thor's description: 6 fingers, no navel, extraordinarily intelligent, being kept in a high-security underground apartment in the Pentagon between 1957 and 1960. During that same period, and amid many internal discussions, U.S. leaders allowed Thor continued access inside the Pentagon premises. The decision made was both strategic and surreal. Keep your enemies close, but keep a possible alien emissary even closer. A visitor from Venus. Valiant Thor introduced himself not as a foreign diplomat, scientist, or government agent, but as a Venusian emissary, a being from the planet Venus sent to Earth on a mission of peace and guidance. This bold claim immediately challenged everything scientists and governments thought they knew about the solar system. According to Dr. Frank E. Stranges, who chronicled the encounter in Stranger at the Pentagon, Thor stated he came from the interior of Venus, not its hostile surface, and belonged to a higher civilization that had long observed Earth's growing instability. He told me, "I am from the High Council on Venus. My purpose is to assist Earth in avoiding destruction," Stranges recounted in public interviews and lectures. Thor's physical appearance helped him blend in. He was described as tall, symmetrical, and nearly flawless in facial structure. But several physiological anomalies immediately raised red flags. Thor had 6 fingers on each hand, no fingerprints, and most shockingly, no navel, a biological feature essential for humans born on Earth. These physical traits were documented in classified Pentagon medical exams, later referenced in declassified material. His explanation was equally startling. He was not born of woman, but was materialized or created, a being that did not require human-style birth. As one CIA medical consultant allegedly remarked, "There's no biological pathway that makes sense here. He's not human, not in any way we understand." Thor's expedition was scientific, but most of all spiritual. He warned of humanity's self-destruction in nuclear warfare, environmental degradation, and immoral behavior. Thor, reportedly speaking to military officials, said, "Your own weapons will become your undoing." He asked for a change of consciousness and returned to what he called universal law, a higher ethical calling that advanced civilizations share throughout the galaxy. He spoke fluently in over 100 languages, including unknown dialects thought to be of extraterrestrial origin, and usually prefers telepathic communication. Those who came into contact with him reported feeling a form of peace and clarity in mind, as though the very presence of this individual elevated their awareness. Yet all such claims of being a Venerian met with widespread disbelief and secretiveness. From the scientific standpoint, Venus is treated as inhospitable to life because of excessive heat and atmospheric pressure. However, Thor argued that there was no limit to human understanding of life in terms of physical parameters, and that beings like him existed interdimensionally or in alternate densities yet unrecognized by the science of Earth. Your instruments cannot measure what they do not understand, as Thor reportedly said to a physicist at the Pentagon. He offered an insight that could change medicine, energy, and geopolitics. But the origin became one of the primary reasons the message was silenced, and it challenged the foundations of belief on which the Earth rested. The disturbing biology of Valiant Thor. Upon his arrival at the Pentagon in 1957, Valiant Thor underwent a series of physical examinations by top military and medical personnel. It was during these evaluations that doctors discovered a series of biological anomalies so unusual that they immediately raised the possibility that Thor was not human by any known Earth standard. Most strikingly, Thor had no navel, a feature universally present in humans as a remnant of the umbilical cord. One Pentagon physician reportedly stated, "It's biologically impossible. Every mammal has a navel. The absence of one suggests he was never born, at least not in any natural way we understand." In addition to his missing navel, Thor had 6 fingers on each hand, yet they were proportionate and functional, with no signs of surgical alteration or deformity. More disturbing was the fact that his fingers lacked fingerprints entirely. No swirls, ridges, or identifying marks. "They looked normal at first glance," said one intelligence officer involved in his processing, "but there was nothing to scan, nothing to lift. It was as if his identity had been deliberately erased or never existed in our biological framework." This lack of physical traceability made it impossible to categorize him within any human system of identification. The doctors, who studied Thor very thoroughly and meticulously, also confirmed that his skin had no blemishes, no scars, and no pore openings. His internal structure was almost like a human, but scans showed irregular patterns, especially the abnormalities around the abdominal and cranial areas. But still, it was noticed that he had no body odor, a pulse that could not be detected by any normal means, and then there was this slight warmth, which signified that he was emotional at that instance. About these things, although none seemed threatening, they still gave some kind of creepy feeling to the military's medical teams. Every layer we peeled back made us more certain he wasn't from here, recalled one CIA medical consultant. "We weren't looking at a man, we were looking at something else, something made." These biological peculiarities remained classified under Project Sigma, a covert Pentagon initiative investigating extraterrestrial contact. No matter how significant, no official record of Thor's physical examinations was ever made available to the public, fueling speculation of a cover-up. Indeed, in the quiet, undeniable message his body became, one thing all his co-workers shared. Thor's physical form was too perfect to be natural, and his anatomy too at odds with Earth-based life to be a mutation or hoax. He was not one of us. Unnatural powers. Among the most unsettling aspects of Valiant Thor's presence at the Pentagon were his unexplained mental abilities, traits that defied logic and left even the most hardened officials unnerved. Reports circulated from the moment he arrived that Thor often spoke without moving his lips, transmitting complete thoughts and ideas directly into the minds of those around him. According to Dr. Frank E. Stranges, who interviewed Thor personally, his communication was instant and flawless. You didn't hear words, you just knew what he was saying. This telepathy wasn't just anecdotal. Multiple high-ranking individuals who met with him claimed they experienced thoughts that weren't their own, often feeling mentally disarmed and emotionally calm in his presence. One of the most frequently cited phenomena was Thor's ability to create an emotional atmosphere of tranquility and openness, even among skeptical and suspicious government officials. Several Pentagon staffers stated they felt as though they couldn't lie in his presence. It was as if Thor could intuitively detect dishonesty or fear, and those around him felt compelled to speak truthfully without coercion. A former intelligence officer anonymously recalled, "I had rehearsed what I was going to say, but when he looked at me, it was like he already knew. I couldn't go through with the lie." This emotional influence wasn't threatening. It was subtle, almost comforting, but it left people vulnerable in ways they couldn't explain. Then, as if there was something extraordinary about his intellect, it was said to be bordering on the incomprehensible. He had reportedly an IQ of 200, which was a figure so absurdly high that most would have dismissed it as fantasy at first. However, among those who would come to know him, there emerged descriptions of a being who could speak over 100 languages, including several non-human tongues, and could analyze complex scientific theories in seconds. He understood things our brightest minds couldn't grasp, and he didn't need time to think about it, noted one Pentagon scientist. Thor understood medicine, physics, theology, and geopolitics. And what set him apart from any known human intelligence was the ability to recall and apply instantly. However, Thor never learned to be haughty or rough. He would use his ability sparingly and always show restraint in his dealings with others. That is what was most disturbing to many, not just what he could do, but also how calmly he would choose not to use it to dominate or show off. His quiet mastery over the mental and emotional fields around him only deepened the mystery of his origin and purpose. He had the power to control a room, Dr. Stranges once said, but he never needed to raise his voice. He didn't overpower people. He let them feel they were seeing things clearly for the first time. This combination of heightened intelligence and instincts is telepathy, emotional influence, and all else. Thor was something far beyond human, a living enigma who changed every room he entered without saying a word. Yet Thor wasn't just a visitor with strange abilities. He became something much harder to explain. 3 years inside the Pentagon. Valiant Thor's visit to Earth wasn't a brief appearance. It became a 3-year mission carried out within the heart of the U.S. government. From 1957 to 1960, Thor lived in a secure underground suite within the Pentagon, where he held countless closed-door meetings with top military commanders, government scientists, and civilian policymakers. According to declassified details linked to Project Sigma, Thor's role was that of a peaceful advisor offering a radical new path for humanity, one that blended advanced technology with spiritual insight. He didn't come to conquer or threaten, said Dr. Frank Stranges. He came to counsel and elevate. Thor's proposals addressed some of the most urgent crises of the era. He offered technologies for free, unlimited energy, solutions to end global hunger, and medical knowledge that could cure many diseases. He even introduced theoretical models for neutralizing radioactive contamination, which deeply interested scientists amid Cold War tensions. But perhaps the most controversial aspect of his message was his call for nuclear disarmament and global unity, delivered not just as a political strategy, but as a spiritual imperative. Thor believed humanity was on a path to self-destruction, not only through weapons, but through greed, environmental neglect, and loss of ethical direction. "You are standing at a crossroads," he told military leaders. "One path leads to extinction, the other to ascension." The officials in the military and intelligence of the United States found, however, that Thor's proposals were revolutionary but problematic. During this volatile period of the Cold War, disarmament of nuclear stockpiles and conversion to a global peace model was not just impractical, but dangerously naive or potentially manipulative. Some accused Thor of being a Soviet agent or a psychological operative. Others simply worried that accepting his proposals would make the world order unstable. He said, "Let us dissolve borders, let us dissolve hate," said one ex-Pentagon consultant. It may sound noble, but for those in charge, it meant the end of their control. Nevertheless, Thor was unwilling to break faith or give up hope, so he met with anyone willing to listen, nudging them along this longer road towards the recognition of long-term implications as opposed to the ephemeral hold of power. However, it was becoming apparent over time that the system and fear would bury his message. Every single idea he brought forth, wonderfully progressive or altruistically motivated, was a non-starter or utter stall in long-running delays. In the end, Thor's sojourn in the Pentagon would serve as a metaphor for man's denial of help or the need to change in the face of threatening power structures. As Dr. Strange said, he didn't fail, we did fail him. And in that process, we may have even failed ourselves. Over peace. Despite Valiant Thor's peaceful intentions and revolutionary solutions, the United States ultimately rejected his help, a decision that now appears to have shaped the course of global events. Thor proposed systems that could have eliminated war, hunger, and disease, offering free energy, cures for terminal illnesses, and technologies to purify the environment. But instead of being embraced, his proposals were met with suspicion and resistance. According to Dr. Frank Strange's, Thor's plans were not just ahead of their time, they were disruptive to the very systems in place. His ideas directly challenged the foundation of modern power: military dominance, fossil fuel dependency, and centralized economic control. Thor's most controversial proposal was his advocacy for complete nuclear disarmament. He urged world leaders to dismantle their arsenals and shift toward global cooperation rather than competition. But in the thick of the Cold War, just as the Soviet Union launched Sputnik and the arms race escalated, Thor's call for peace was seen as dangerously idealistic. To the US military, it raised alarms. "If we disarm and the Soviets don't, we lose everything," one Pentagon official is reported to have said. In a world where mutual destruction was considered balance, peace was perceived as weakness, not wisdom. But under this offer lay a more serious, danger-free, and unlimited energy technology that would be able to abolish the use of oil, coal, and gas, practically overnight. For these countries and corporations that made their wealth and power depend on energy monopolies, in fact, it was an existential threat. Defense contractors, energy conglomerates, and political elites would stand to lose everything should Thor's technology be implemented. A Pentagon's top-secret memo from 1959 referenced in declassified files states, "Discredit and suppress all non-conformist technologies threatening national security and economic interests." This energy proposal of Thor fell right smack into that category. It was not that Thor's concept of peace was flawed, but that it threatened the power structures of the world. To accept his help would have meant a seismic shift in global priorities, from profit to purpose, from control to cooperation. That was too great a risk for those in power. The truth is, Dr. Strange said, Thor didn't fail in his mission. Humanity failed to rise to it. Those who silenced him were not disbelievers. They feared the consequences of a person believing him. The Doctor Who spoke the truth. In the years following Valiant Thor's mysterious visit to Earth, one man emerged as the sole public voice determined to keep his story alive. Dr. Frank E. Strange, a minister, author, and UFO investigator. In 1967, he published the now famous book, Stranger at the Pentagon, where he claimed not only to have met Valiant Thor in person, but to have received direct insight into Thor's mission and the government's reaction. According to Dr. Strange's, Thor was a being of peace and wisdom who came to help humanity avoid destruction. What he offered was revolutionary, but the people in power weren't ready. His book became a cornerstone of UFO literature, even as mainstream media and scientific communities dismissed it as fantasy. Dr. Strange's was not a fringe cultist, but a well-educated theologian and founder of the National Investigations Committee on Unidentified Flying Objects, UFO. He gave lectures across the United States, spreading the message that Valiant Thor was real. His mission was genuine, and that humanity had squandered an extraordinary opportunity. Throughout the late 1960s and 70s, Strange's faced mockery and intense skepticism, especially from journalists and academics who labeled him a conspiracy theorist. Still, he never backed down. "I saw the photographs. I spoke to him. What he said was too important to stay silent," Strange's declared in multiple interviews. Even really criticizing Strange's forced the implication somewhere into gaining loyalty and a cultivable audience. Now, he was describing Thor as an extraordinarily kind and intelligent being, which was deeply concerning even in terms of Earth's fate and the spiritual decay of humankind. For Strange's, such a message by Thor was suppressed intentionally and discussed only in governments where the power held do not want to receive alien assistance. In his view, the military-industrial complex viewed Thor's proposals as a threat to their control, a gift to the world. He also claims that certain Pentagon officials warned him not to spread the word, though without avail. For Strange's, it's worth the risk. "The truth knows no expiry period," he says often. Dr. Strange's passed away in 2008, but his legacy lives on through his work that circulates among UFO and alternative history enthusiasts. Even though many remain skeptical about Strange's claims, recent attention on declassified files and whistleblower testimony from programs such as Project Sigma has reinvigorated interest in his accounts. His persistence guaranteed that the name Valiant Thor would not disappear into oblivion. Either as a purveyor of truth or a deluded believer, Dr. Frank Strange's became the human link for one of the most fascinating and controversial extraterrestrial stories in American history, and his fight to be heard still echoes today. Cover-up. Confirmed. For decades, the story of Valiant Thor was dismissed as science fiction or conspiracy lore, until recently. A wave of declassified government documents and credible whistleblower testimony has begun to confirm what believers have claimed all along. Valiant Thor was real, and his presence was officially documented under a covert operation known as Project Sigma. This secret Pentagon program, active in the 1950s and beyond, was tasked with investigating extraterrestrial contact and exploring potential diplomatic relations with non-human entities. Documents uncovered in recent years reference a being matching Thor's exact description: 6 fingers, no navel, advanced cognitive ability, and a mission centered on peace and disarmament. One of the most incriminating pieces of evidence comes from a Pentagon memo dated December 1959, which outlined a plan to suppress Thor's proposals and erase all public knowledge of his visit. The memo explicitly called for the discrediting of any reports related to Valiant Thor, and for labeling anyone who spoke about him as a conspiracy theorist. A former intelligence officer connected to Project Sigma later confirmed there was an active campaign to bury everything: documents, photos, even the medical reports. We were told to act like he never existed. This wasn't merely government secrecy. It was a coordinated erasure, meant to eliminate both the man and the message he brought. Whistleblowers from within the CIA and U.S. Air Force have come forward in recent years, some in interviews and others through leaked testimonies, supporting the very existence of Thor. These insiders talked about closed-door briefings, intelligence reports, and in-house debates on whether to accept or silence him. As one former CIA analyst said in a private interview, "We weren't just dealing with a new technology, we were dealing with a new paradigm." Thor's message meant the end of the world as we knew it. That terrified the people in power. Their testimonies hint at a stark truth. Thor's peaceful agenda posed more danger to power structures than any weapon could. These revelations of documents and testimonies have rekindled public excitement and prompted some researchers to revive the dire warnings Dr. Frank Strange's had been issuing for years that some cover-up was taking place. As these documents continue to circulate, they strongly indicate that the story of VT was never a case of conviction. It was a matter of control. Had his technology been accepted, it would have shuttered industries, dismantled the military-industrial complex, and transferred global authority onto the people. Instead, the truth was carefully buried. And now, decades later, with the remnants emerging from the shadows, it is clear there was no disappearance of Valiant Thor, but rather an eradication. Now that the silence is broken, the real question is, what did we lose by not listening? Humanity's missed chance for salvation. In hindsight, the warnings delivered by Valiant Thor during his time on Earth read less like theory and more like prophecy. Decades ago, Thor spoke urgently about humanity's reckless reliance on nuclear weapons, unsustainable energy practices, and the spiritual decay threatening our global civilization. He warned of a future where unchecked greed, environmental destruction, and technological overreach would bring the world to the brink. You are heading toward a crisis that cannot be undone if you do not change, he reportedly told U.S. officials. Today, as the world faces worsening climate catastrophes, widespread inequality, and growing political instability, one question looms large. Was Valiant Thor right all along? Thor's proposal for free and limitless energy could have transformed the world. He offered technology that did not rely on fossil fuels or centralized grid systems, which now contribute significantly to climate change and environmental degradation. Had his solution been accepted, we may have avoided today's energy crises, global warming, and the geopolitical conflicts tied to oil and resource scarcity. Instead, his offer was silenced, buried by industries and political entities that feared the collapse of their profit-driven empires. As we now witness unprecedented wildfires, sea level rise, and climate migration, Thor's rejected alternative feels more like a missed lifeline than a fringe fantasy. These dire warnings that Thor issued were not only to caution against the degradation of the atmosphere, but also on the dangers of fussing technology, especially systems that eliminated human values ahead of their actual arrival. He seems to have described today's scenarios over concerns about AI, surveillance, and deprivation of privacy. Governments have increasingly moved into facial recognition, biometric tagging, and AI-based decision-making without ethical oversight. The cautions of Thor were against a world in which technology advances faster than wisdom. And today, this apprehension is echoed by even the greatest scientists. Not merely a visitor from another world, but a mirror held to our future. His foresight into the spiritual and psychological cost of unchecked power made clear. The most alarming of Thor's calls was for abandoning war and nationalism in favor of universal unity and spiritual evolution. In this age of increasing authoritarianism, division, and incessant military conflict, his message of a universal consciousness and cooperation was considered utopian. But with nations growing increasingly antagonistic and rising tides of conflict emerging from every corner of the globe, it is increasingly becoming apparent that Thor's path, however difficult, was the way to survival. He didn't come to save us from ourselves. He came to offer us the tools to do it ourselves. And we turned him away, Dr. Frank Strange's lamented. Thanks for watching. If this story left you thinking, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more deep dive mysteries, and drop a comment below. What do you think really happened with Valiant Thor? Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss an upload. And if you're ready to go deeper, watch the next video on your screen now. There's more to this mystery than you think.